I'm Debbie Walsh, and I'm the director of the Center for American Women and Politics, or CAWP, and it is my pleasure, along with my colleague Ruth Mandel, the director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics, to welcome you here. For those of you who are just joining us this evening, let me explain the event and the audience. Tonight's speaker is keynoting New Leadership New Jersey, our initiative to educate and empower the next generation of women leaders. 35 students from 20 colleges and universities are gathered here at Eagleton for 6 days to learn about women's political participation and prepare themselves to become effective public leaders. You can read more about it in your program, but I'd like the students from this year's class to stand up. Now you can sit down. One of the things that we did this week was we had a public speaking session, and one of the things that they learned was how to accept applause, so you can tell that they really learned that well. They were going to stand there for as long as you were all willing to applaud. We also have some alums from this program. This is actually the 19th, I think, the 19th, 20th total New Leadership program we've done here, so we have a few alums. So those of you who are alums of the program in the past, if you're here, we had some before, could you stand up for a minute so we can just see you all? Great. Now, all across the country, college students can participate in New Leadership in their own states and regions, thanks to the New Leadership Development Network. Today, 21 partner programs trained by CAWP serve students in 25 states, and there are more than 4,000 alumni of the program nationwide. And among us this evening are representatives of the University of Arizona, the University of Texas at Austin, and from South Carolina, the College of Charleston and Winthrop University. These 4 schools will become our newest partners when they initiate their programs in their own states. And I'd love for our partners to stand up so we can see. New leadership programs are all about recognizing great women leaders and grooming new ones. The women who agreed to be our faculty in residence, or as we call them, FERS, live in the dorms with the students for the week, and they're available to answer all their questions about politics and life. They are inspiring women leaders and wonderful role models. This year's faculty in residence are former Kansas State Representative Delia Garcia, Massachusetts Republican State Committee member Christina Bain, and Ty Cooper, former Chief of Staff to Orange Township's mayor. Now, before we get to our speaker, which is what you're really here for tonight, I do have to acknowledge and want to acknowledge some of the people who have made this program possible. First, Dr. Sasha Patterson, who effectively oversees where are you, Sasha? Every aspect of New Leadership. She, along with a fabulous team of staff and interns, have worked tirelessly to build a program that's educational, effective, and as you can tell, fun. And I'd like to thank Sasha and our entire crew for all of their incredibly hard work. Here in the other room, you can New Leadership benefits from the generosity of the New Jersey State Legislature as well, which established the Senator Winona Littman Chair in Women's Political Leadership. The chair celebrates the late Senator Littman, reminds people of her achievements, and encourages others to follow in the footsteps of this path-breaking African-American woman leader. She was an advocate for people whose voices were not represented when policy was being made, and Senator Landrieu, she is somebody that you would have truly admired. We are honored that the legislature has entrusted CAWP to create a living legacy to Senator Littman. And with this support, we have been able to accomplish many important goals, including providing scholarships for 6 of the students at this year's New Leadership New Jersey. We think Senator Littman would be thrilled to see this impressive group of college women following in her footsteps. So thank you to the New Jersey State Legislature. I also want to mention a few of the other donors who support this program. Some of the fabulous interns for New Leadership are able to work with us because Julia Fischelson provided money for intern stipends. And another donor, Susan Wilson, established a fund that underwrites a portion of New Leadership. There are many other supporters of New Leadership in particular, and of CAWP's programs in general, and all of them have earned our gratitude. But there are 2 who have made major contributions to this year's New Leadership New Jersey program, and I'd like to recognize them. First, the Comcast Foundation has supported our Ready to Run program in the past and is now supporting New Leadership New Jersey. I don't know if Kim Smith was able to get here or not, but I was hoping she'd be here so we could thank her in person. But they clearly get that we need more women of all ages to engage in the political sphere, and we thank them for understanding this important work. We also want to thank PSEG Foundation for their support. They have been longtime funders of CAWP programs, and we are extremely grateful to them for their steadfast confidence in our work. And representing PSEG here tonight is Ann Hoskins. Ann, thank you so much. Now, I don't get to introduce our speaker tonight because by tradition, that privilege goes to one of our students. But I have to take a moment to thank our keynote speaker. Mary Landrieu is somebody who has been a longtime friend of the center, a longtime friend of mine. I feel like we kind of grew up together in politics, but look where she got to go. She is somebody who has a long-standing commitment to advancing women's leadership, and I want to thank you for remaining such a strong friend of the Center for American Women in Politics over these past, it's hard to believe, 30 years. But now it is my pleasure to introduce the introducer, Jennifer Valentine, a junior at Georgian Court and a member of this year's New Leadership class.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have the pleasure of introducing Senator Mary L. Landrieu. She's been fighting and winning for Louisiana since she was first elected to the Louisiana State Legislature at the age of 23. After serving 8 years as a state representative and 2 terms as state treasurer, in 1996 she became the first woman from Louisiana elected to a full term in the U.S. Senate. Senator Landrieu is currently the chair of the Senate Small Business Committee, where she is leading efforts to ensure all small businesses have access to capital and contracts, superior health insurance at a low cost, and the resources needed to help boost our economy and guarantee America's competitiveness in the global marketplace. She is also chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security. This committee is responsible for drafting legislation to fund the Department of Homeland Security's 20 offices and 7 sub-agencies. It is also considered the most powerful panel on Capitol Hill. She fights for Louisiana's jobs and economic interests and the funding the state needs to rebuild from the 2005 and 2008 hurricanes. And lastly, she is a member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. She co-authorized the landmark Dominici-Landrieu Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, which was signed into law in 2006. The bill expanded oil and gas production in the Gulf of Mexico by more than 8 million acres and shares the revenues with Louisiana to restore and protect the eroding wetlands along the Gulf Coast. She is also involved in a number of things, such as leading the voice in Washington for the Gulf Coast recovery effort. Since the levees in New Orleans have failed the town, she's committed to recovering dollars and has worked extensively to jumpstart recovery projects. She is also reforming the Federal Emergency Management Agency to ensure the nation's disaster response arm is speedy and effective the next time a disaster strikes. Not only being a politically active woman, she is also a home wife where she has a home life where she is married to Frank Snellings and has 2 children. Please welcome Senator Mary.
Thank you, Jennifer. You did a beautiful job. And Jennifer's correct. I do have a very active home life. In fact, it's so active that I'm going to be having to get on a train at 9 o'clock tonight and go back to Washington. I was going to try to stay overnight with you all, enjoy myself, relax in a hotel room alone without kids. But my 19-year-old son, who's just finished his first year at Tulane, got poison ivy a week ago and decided not to go to the doctor until 5 minutes before I walked out of the house today. So this is how active life is for those of us in public office, married with children. I'll come back to that in a minute. But I am really thrilled to be here. Debbie Walsh has invited me every year for the last 10 years, and for whatever reason, I just wasn't able to kind of fit it in the schedule, and she said, Mary, you just got to come. So I'm really, really happy to be here. I've heard about this program. I'm anxious to meet all of you. I'm thrilled to see how great the program is going, and because this program, not this exact, but this center, helped me to get my start in public life, I was very, very grateful to come back and to say thank you, not just to Debbie, who's running the program now, but Ruth Mendel, who was running the program when I started in the dinosaur age. 100 years ago. No, not quite, but 30 years ago, Ruth and I started out together. Debbie was part of the program then as Ruth's assistant, and now everyone's moved up a couple of levels. And Debbie and Ruth are just joking. They could both run for the United States Senate and get elected. Both of them could if they decided to set their mind. Their name recognition is really quite expansive all over this nation. And I want to thank the sponsors. Ann, it's wonderful to see you. You were at my home just a couple of weeks ago, and the Comcast gals and guys that have supported the program too have been wonderfully supportive. And thank you for supporting, and all the hosts and sponsors that are here. It just means a lot to these young girls to have your commitment, and without the corporate support and friends of the university and friends of the center, it just couldn't happen for you all. And I hope those of you that are here studying how this is working will go back to your colleges and give the good news that it is still so needed to give space to young women, to be able to encourage them to go into public life. We sometimes, I think, those of us that have been doing it for a while take it for granted until I start preparing for a presentation like tonight, even though this will be very informal, and I hope we'll have a good time for exchange. And I'm reminded of the startling statistics, like only 2% of the Congress of the United States has ever been only 2% have been women in the entire Congress since 1789. Only 2%. And I feel when I look around and I see the 71 women in the House and the 17 women in the Senate, and I open up, walk across the street, which I do every now and then, to the Supreme Court, and I see the 3 women on the court, and we actually, women senators, have dinner at least once a year with the women on the court, which is quite a wonderful dinner that I'd love to tell you all about. And when I'm around that table and we're all in that room together, it just seems so like it should be. And then when I look at these statistics, I think, how long is it going to take until we really have parity in this nation? Parity at the highest levels of politics and government and in the corporate world. Ann and I were just talking. We just co-sponsored a group of us together in the center, and Debbie, and were very helpful in putting together a big conference that brought women from all over the country together on women and energy and the environment. If you think about it, the environmentalists have their meetings, and then the energy industry has its meetings, and never the twain shall meet. And so we brought this group together, and I didn't even realize that there were that many women in particularly the energy field, oil, gas, etc., wind, solar, nuclear, But when everyone showed up at my house, I was like, well, wow, where are we going to fit everyone? It was an overwhelming group, but still a drop in the bucket when you think about the breadth of that industry. And so, like Dianne Feinstein said, 2% might be great for milk, but it's not good for the United States of America, And what will be really great for America is when women represent at least 50%. When we fight at our weight, right now we're fighting above our weight, but when we're able to fight at our weight in corporate America and in politics, and just because one woman makes it, that's not the test. It's not the test when just one extraordinary woman like Hillary Rodham Clinton, who is quite extraordinary, and other women who are have run for president before and are positioning themselves now. But the test is really when you look out at Congress and 50% of those seats are held by women, or you look out in New Jersey. Your particular situation is very challenging. I understand you don't have one woman in your delegation. And you have great guys in your delegation. I work with them every day. In fact, I sit next to both Menendez and Lautenberg, because Menendez and I sit next to each other at lunch on Tuesdays, and we have the pick of our seats, so we enjoy sitting next to each other. And then Senator Lautenberg and I share the Homeland Security Committee. He's actually my vice chair. I chair the committee, and he's my vice chair. So, and I work very closely with John Corzine. But nonetheless, it's a challenge, and I hope that some of you in this program will think about and consider the possibility. In fact, you had a session today, and I understand, on why is it important to run for office. Now, not everyone is called to run, and not everyone actually has the skill set to run. So you have to really, really think about that, and I think that this program will help you to do a little self-examination and is it something that's really in your heart and inside of you, not something that people are pushing you to do? It's really got to come from the inside of you to do it well. But some of you might discover that while you may not have or want to be the candidate, you can be extremely influential as a chief of staff or a chief communication officer. I mean, think about I've got 6 or 7 people on my communications team, both in my office and the committees I chair, that get to help me write my speeches or put remarks out to the newspaper about what I want to say. Now, I usually ask them to check with me every now and then before they just put something out, but they can walk into my office and I'm busy and they say, Senator, this is what I think we should say today on this issue. The nuclear power plant blew up in Japan. This is what we want to say. Is it okay? I look at it and go. So, I mean, you can be very influential as a policy person, as a communications, as a staff person, as a researcher. You could be very influential as a spouse of someone running for office. I don't want you to limit yourself to not thinking about, you could be a spouse of someone in office and you can be in office yourself. I mean, there are lots of opportunities. But I just wanted to share tonight a little bit. Debbie asked me about how I got started and a few things about a day in the life of a senator, and then I'd like to open it up for questions and comments. But I'd like to tell you all really a little bit about how the journey really is to get to the United States Senate. It may be a lot less, I'm sure it's a lot less glamorous. It is a lot less glamorous than I think you all might think at this age, but I literally started out running for public office in 7th grade. I ran for vice president because my very best friend, I was at a new school, my best friend at this new school, who I'd only known for a few weeks, suggested that I do it. So I liked her, and she wanted to be the president. She needed a vice president, so I said fine, and lo and behold, I won. Well, I won an office every year since 7th grade, either as vice president or president of the class. Now, the duties and responsibilities were, quite minimal. You could make posters and gather people and make announcements. By the time I got to be in high school, I had my one of my other best friends, who really could have been student body president, knew how much I wanted to be student body president, and so she ran for vice president. I ran for president. We had a very friendly school, and of 350 girls, and I won for president of my student body and knew every single girl in my school, 350. I was very blessed to go to a small Catholic girls' school. The Ursuline nuns who taught me, taught my mother and taught my grandmother, arrived in New Orleans in 1727. And they came to civilize the place, and it's still a work in progress. That's what I can say about my hometown and my city. But nonetheless, I got to be student body president. And I can still remember thinking that at that age, and I was, 17, that I was just running the show, and sort of was. I mean, the principal and I were kind of like best friends, and I would do announcements, and then when she wasn't there, she'd let me do announcements. And so I grew up, I had the great pleasure to grow up having that early leadership experience. And literally, this is a true story. The first day I got to the Senate, and I sat down on a dais to be on a committee, I honestly said to myself, I'm not that scared because I've done this in student council before. I mean, that is the truth. It is the truth. And that happened when I was in the legislature and when I was in the Senate, because you're very nervous when you start out anything, no matter what you've done. But I said to myself, I've done this. I've conducted meetings. I know a little bit about Robert's Rules, and I learned that literally in high school. So I hope some of you have had that kind of experience, leadership in your class, and that's terrific, and now you're in college. In college, I went to a big college. Some of you might go to very large colleges, and I just didn't have that much of an opportunity to be in government, but I joined a sorority, and my leadership skills developed, ended up being president, vice president of my sorority, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't that I sort of sought the leadership position. I mean, to be modest in this way, that my friends would say, Mary, you can do it, you do it well, we'll listen to you. Now, I guess I've been bossy since I was born, and that is natural because I was the oldest of 9 children, and my mother had us in 11 years. And so when I was 10, okay, think about this. This is a sad thing to say. When I was 10, or a happy thing, depending on how you look at it, I had 8 younger brothers and sisters, and when I was 11, I had 9. No, I had 8. I had 8 when I was 11. I had 8. So think about a 10-year-old girl about this high, and my mother would say things to me like, "I've got to go to the grocery store. Would you watch the 5 kids, at home?" Now, our neighborhood was safe and everything, and she'd leave to go to the grocery store, but I didn't think anything of it. I'd say yes, and I would do it. So when I was young, I just sort of learned how to organize and get, my brothers and sisters would, if they were here, they would tell you terrible stories about me when I was young, so I don't bring them anywhere when I speak. But I tried to be the best big sister I could be, but I grew up in that kind of environment. In addition to the leadership that I had at school and the chances I got that the other girls believed in me and the nuns believed in me and encouraged me, I came from a family where both parents said to me, you can be anything you want to be, and treated the girls equal with the boys. We got the same chores. We got to play on the same ball fields. We got to go on the same trips. In fact, my parents, who are still married to this day and are 80 years old and been married for happily and faithfully for 57 years, everything they did for one of us, they did for all of us. So if one child got a pair of shoes, we all got one, or we weren't wealthy by any means. And if one of us got to go on a trip, like to a young leadership when I went in high school, a program in Louisiana, similar to this, but for high school, every single one of my brothers and sisters got to go, which is quite amazing. So as the oldest, I got to sort of set a path for them. I'm not going to be too long here, but just to tell you, you just aren't one day a mayor. You're not one day a member of Congress. It's a lifetime of opportunities and experiences that build your skill set and hone your interest and give you, whatever, the courage to go to do what you want to do. Now, one more thing, and then I'll go into my first election, which I want to share with you. My dad was also a public official. My father was elected to the legislature when he was 29. So when I was 5 years old, I remember going with him to the Louisiana legislature. So you can imagine, if some of you have elected officials in your family, maybe they've taken you to a rally, maybe they've taken you. My dad took me into the House chamber. And I can remember at 6 and 7 years old, he would leave me at his desk. And he'd say, just press the button and vote like Representative Smithers. So, I was at 6 years old, a little one. This was in the old days where they had no rules, and you could eat on the floor. And you could do, I can't even, sneeze on the floor in the United States Senate. We can only drink water. We can't even have coffee. Of course, no cell phone. No laptops, and no kids, which is a sore subject to me, but I can appreciate it, but it's a long-standing rule. Now, the House members, sometimes their children are allowed on the floor, but never in the Senate. But I remember as a little girl, I used to literally sit in my dad's chair. What I love about, and love many things about my father and admire, but what I most love about him is how brave he is and how courageous he is, because he was a civil rights leader in the Deep South in the 1960s. He graduated in the 50s from Loyola University, and he was a great civil rights leader. And so sometimes I'd be sitting in that chair, and all of the lights would be, green for voting for Jim Crow laws, for laws that kept the races segregated, and my dad's light would be the only one red light, no. So I grew up in a family that others criticized for being, we were for progress and for integration and for the African American community and advancement. So that had a huge influence in my life. And so as a little girl, I grew up thinking that women were very strong, because why? My mother was strong, my sisters, my teachers, the nuns around me, my father encouraged me. So I came from a fairly protected kind of encouraging environment. Well, it's a good thing. It is a good thing I did, because at the age of 23, when I graduated from LSU, got a degree in sociology. I did not want to be a lawyer. I didn't even really want to be an elected official. I never thought I would be an elected official. I literally thought I would marry someone that would be an elected official, and that I would do what my mother did, support him and have 9 children. That is what I thought. And maybe part-time be a teacher, part-time be a nurse, and organize things. That's as far as I thought. So I got a degree in sociology, graduated from LSU, really wanted to be an interdenominational minister. I had a really life-changing religious experience at LSU and became very, very attached to my faith again, having left it for a while and kind of came back to it, but nonetheless wanted to do that. So I had all these plans, and I came home from college, so I'll be a few years older than you all now, because you're still in college and you're thinking about these things, without a job, without knowing what I was going to do, with a degree in sociology. And my father said, you can come home to this house, but you cannot sit around twiddling your thumbs doing nothing. Now, he knew I wasn't a lazy child. I had been working since I was 15. I had been teaching swimming. I worked at the post office. I've, work. But he said, you don't have to work, sweetheart, but you have to do something. So I went and volunteered in a campaign. Now, how many of you have volunteered in a campaign yet? Okay, so many of you have. I've done that. I did everything you did. I opened the door in the morning. I swept the floor. I made the coffee. I, handed out I drew posters. Thought, well, I did this in 7th grade, I could, it's just a little more sophisticated posters, but I think I could design them, and so I just sort of used, and I just did everything in the campaign. Well, lo and behold, the candidate that I was supporting that had no chance to win a citywide race, a group of us about our age, they weren't much older than I was. I was 22-ish, and there were a few, kids, boys and girls, young men and women, a little bit older than that, about 8 of us. We had no chance to win this race. 0, 0, 0. We had no money. The other guy was going to win. He had billboards. But we just decided we were going to win. We worked ourselves to death. And lo and behold, we win the citywide judgeship race. Very exciting. And I had been with my dad when he had won races, but I had never been like a colleague to someone that wasn't my parents. This was a big step. In that race, the labor guys, we had business and labor in this particular district, the labor guys came to me and said, we're looking for a candidate. You're young, but you're smart, and you work hard. Will you run? So I'm thinking, I'm 23. I don't have a job. I have no idea what I want to do. I think maybe, oh, wait, I forgot to tell you. In college, I was a telephone operator in the House of Representatives. I'd gotten a job as an intern as a telephone operator. So little miss, all the confidence in the world. My father says I can do anything. I believe him. My mother says I can do anything. So they say, will you run? And in my mind, this is how silly this is now, but I said, I know what they do. I've answered the phone. I've listened to what they've said. I've listened to them. I've listened to the debate. I think I could do that. I think I understand those issues. Hello, what was I thinking? But I just did it. And I really didn't even tell my father because I was thinking he might say that was a little bit bold to do. And so I didn't tell him. So what I did was I went and organized, just like I had been doing since I was in 7th grade. I got my little group of friends together, talked to them. They said to me it was a great idea. I said, well, fine, if I do it, would you help me? So one weekend, I picked out my colors. I picked out my logos, very important to pick out your colors and your logo, and went to a friend's house and we made 500 signs. And I said, if I could go make these signs and if people will actually put the signs on the house, and if I could, then I sat down at my desk and I wrote a list of, I think, 100 people that would give me $100. And I said, if I called every one of those people and they would give me $100. Now, this is a time when a legislative race, Ruth, costs $45,000, which is a lot of money, but believe me, it's nothing. Might sound a lot, but it's nothing. The last time I ran for the Senate, I raised $20 million. Wow. So this is $45,000 30 years ago. I said, if that many people will give me, money, then I'll know. So I put up 500 signs in the district in 2 weeks, and I'd gotten on the phone every day. And so when I went to see my father, he had already seen the signs, and he looked at me and he said, so you're running for the legislature? I see your signs everywhere. That's how that conversation started. But he said, go ahead and do it. I'll support you. Now, my dad had been the mayor of the city. He'd been a legislator, so we had name recognition. So I have to say, I won this race not completely on my own, but I'd grown up in that neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. I say all that to tell you that that's when the real world hit. When I went to the legislature, I walked in at 23 years old, having walked my district every single day for over 6 months by myself. I didn't want anybody to walk with me, although on Saturdays my father insisted that he campaign with me, which is a whole other story. On Saturdays my brothers and sisters would campaign with me, but during the rest of the week I walked by myself. I wanted to because I said people wouldn't be afraid of a young woman that was 23. They might be afraid of a man. Who knows? I was just kind of going by my instincts, but I said if I knock on the door and I'm nice, maybe they'll let me come in, talk to them. So I did, and when I finished walking for 6 hours every day, I'd go back to my little office, which I rented for barely nothing, and my 3 or 4 friends would sit with me, but I wrote every handwritten thank you note to every person I met. And I literally did that for a year. Now, I had put up so many signs for this race before my opponent, who was still in the legislature, I was running against an incumbent, ever came home. So when he came home from the legislature in July, I had already canvassed the district once. I had already put up so many signs, and he just could not believe, this older man could not believe that this young 23-year-old woman could ever beat him. First mistake in politics, never underestimate your opponent. And even if you're running against somebody and you think he doesn't know anything or she doesn't know anything, never, ever, ever underestimate your opponent. So I got into the legislature, and this is going to go much more quickly, but that's when the sort of happy part ended, because I got to the legislature and I was 3 women out of 105, and I was the youngest by decades. I mean, decades. I was 23, the average was now my age, 55, 60, 70-year-olds in the legislature. I was from New Orleans, which is a more progressive part of the state. They were from the more conservative part of the state. And that's kind of when it all started going downhill. But just to fast forward, I survived the 8 years in the legislature, but worked very, very hard. And then that's when I got elected that first time that I thought, this is something that I really want to do. But honestly, girls, until you really kind of step out and do it, you're not really sure if that's really what you want. And I said I did when I ran, and I had confidence about it. And the first time I had to give a public speech, I literally fainted. And the second time I had to go give a speech, I was so hysterical, I talked my friend into going and giving it for me, and I stayed in the car and hid, true story, hid in the parking lot because I just didn't think I could do it. So believe me, I might look like I can talk now, and I can do this and that, but when I started out, it was very hard. But I'll tell you something, deep in my heart, I always knew that I could make a difference if I could just get to a position where I could vote, speak, be a chairman. I could fight for the things that I believed in. And I believe that all children need a chance. All kids need to be educated well. I believe that we should have a clean and very balanced environment. I believe so much about new kinds of energy policy. I most certainly believe in orphans, and I'm the chair of the Orphan Coalition. I've traveled all over the world to orphanages everywhere, trying to convince people that they really need families and get them out of these orphanages. And I have a lot of passions inside of me that I wanted. So it made me, every time I wanted to give up, I just kept thinking, Mary, you've got to keep going because you can be a voice for this or for that or lead this cause. So I spent 8 years in the legislature. Finally, in my second term, 3 other women came. But the whole time I was there were less than 6 women in the Louisiana legislature. Then again, it was just one of these sort of things that happened to me. I was sitting at my desk on the floor, and one of my male colleagues came up and said, did you hear that Mary Evelyn Parker, who was the treasurer for 27 years, isn't going to run again? And I thought, he wasn't even talking to me, but I was big ears. I was listening to what he was saying. And I thought to myself, Louisiana is not a very progressive state, but if they've elected a woman as treasurer, maybe they would elect another one. Myself. And so I thought, I'd like to be treasurer. I'd spent 8 years on the Appropriations Committee. I believed in debt limits and balanced budgets, and I was very interested in that subject. And so, again, I just decided I was going to try to run. And in this particular race, lots of people didn't think I'd made the right choice, I want to say. For the legislature, they came around. But a lot of people tried to say, you're not really a treasurer, you're really like an advocate, run for insurance commissioner, et cetera, et cetera. But the message here is, if you feel like you really have to do it, you just have to do it. I kept saying, I can do this job, I want to be able to do this job. So anyway, the funny story about this election is I campaigned in a small Toyota that had been donated by a Toyota dealership. We had 3 hubcaps, and it wobbled going down the street. And I can remember being out on a highway one night, Ruth. It was so dark and so scary, and it was midnight. And in Louisiana, it rains like crazy. I don't know if it really rains hard here in New Jersey, but when it rains in Louisiana, it floods. Well, hello, Katrina, everything. You know how much water we have. I can remember being in this Toyota with my friend Patty, who was my driver, in water, and I kept saying to her, she was driving, and I had finished giving a speech out in the middle of nowhere in Louisiana, and I kept saying, Patty, I see the water in the headlights. Don't you see that we're like not on the highway, we're like in water? And she says, I think we can make it. I said, I don't think we can. And so we go down this highway that doesn't even look like a highway. It looks like a lake that we're in. And I said, let me check. I opened the door, water gushing into the car. I said, okay, that's enough. Back up, back up. So, I could tell you a million stories, but suffice it to say, no one thought I would win the race. I was 32 years old. I was still single at the time. Thought I would stay single at that point, that no one would marry me after all the things I'd been through, with the campaigns and everything. So I said, well, that's all right. I'll just be a single, elected official. That's all there is. But I wanted to run. 32 years old, I ran against the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the assistant state treasurer, who the treasurer had endorsed, and one other person, another person, and ended up winning in the first primary. That's how much I drove that little Toyota around the state. And again, almost knocked every door in Louisiana. The point of this is hard work means a lot. Some people go to run for office today. I look at them and I think they're just not even working hard enough. They just think that they can get on television, or you can just Twitter, or you can get on Facebook. And I know that technology is different today, but I want you all to know, if you want to do this for elective office or get into public policy, it's hard work. And just take it a step at a time, not to be rushed. So 8 years as treasurer. Then I wanted to run for governor. Then sort of I started knowing in my 30s really what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be governor. I'm not going to tell you a long history about that, other than for 2 years I married and when I was 32 years old. Met a guy. Interestingly, I wanted to marry somebody in politics. He was a public official from the north part of the state. I went to him to ask for his endorsement. His mother was very powerful. He was very powerful. I needed their support when I ran statewide. He not only didn't support me, he supported my opponents. And not only one, he supported both of my opponents and voted for him, and I married him anyway. That's how much I love him. So Frank and I are still married, 22 years later. And still married 22 years later. So I said, his mother said, well, Frank's always wanted to be governor. And so my dad said, well, Mary's always wanted to be governor. So I had to kind of work that out. And he was wonderful. He's a lawyer. And so he said, you've got a lot more, laid down to do that, so go ahead. So we did. And I lost the race by a 0.5 percentage point out of 19 candidates. It was heartbreaking. I spent 60 days after the election literally on a treadmill. I was so mad. I was mad at myself. I wasn't mad at anyone else. I just knew if I had just done a little bit more, which really isn't true, but that's how I am. I knew that if I had just done a little bit more, I could have won. But God has his own plan, and I can only tell you all that he has a plan for you. And you just need to sort of rest in it and find it. I was devastated. I was now 39. I had run for governor. I had lost. Really, a guy that won was not going to be a very good governor. He's a friend of mine, but he wasn't a very outstanding leader. And I thought, this is it. I'm just going to throw the towel in. And then Bennett Johnson was retiring from the Senate, and John Breaux came to me, who was a senator, and said, your poll numbers are higher now than they were before you started this race. What in the heck's going on? He said, people like you. They still support you. There's sometimes voters have remorse about elections. They said, would you run again? I said, absolutely not. I was devastated, you all. I had raised so much money. And then my accountant had made a mistake, and I found out a week after the election that I owed $250,000, which we didn't have that much money, and I had to pay for it myself. I was doing this with a 2-year-old child. Connor was 2, and it was so hard. And anyway, I prayed about it, and my dad and I had a long talk about it, and he said, Mary, you've invested so much money and so much time. You're the leading candidate. If you just could make another 6-month race, you might make it. So I did. And lo and behold, I announced in March. The election, of course, is November. Bill Clinton was a huge help to me, and I ended up winning in the United States Senate. And the end of this is going to be this, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Senate, then take your questions. But the day I got to the Senate, and I was the 31st woman. No, the 19th woman, I think. I'm going to go check. Debbie, we have to check this. I don't even know. But I was like the 20th on the list, somewhere between 20 and 30. And I didn't even know why I was in the Senate. I had never aspired to be a federal official, never had been to Washington other than a week of close-up. Had not done that, but the day that Katrina hit and those levees broke, I knew why I was in the United States Senate, because my hometown went underwater, and one of the great cities in the world was threatened with its very survival. And I could tell you a million things about what I've done to help save that city, but start with, we're rebuilding an entire new public school system for every child in our city. And it's going to be beautiful from the outside and the inside. We have new kinds of public schools. We're building new hospitals. I've built new levees. We're restoring the coast. And I have to say, if I wouldn't have been in the United States Senate, I can promise you the politics that I observed and listened to and absorbed was not interested in rebuilding South Louisiana. So I can go back to when the nuns took me down the bayou, when I was 12. And I saw those shrimp boats, and I said to myself, as a little girl, if I can ever get to a place where I could save them, I will. I'm going to fight for these people, and I'm going to help our state. And so being in the United States Senate, even though it was a very, very tough path to get here, girls, if you just kind of take a step at a time and know yourself well and realize you're going to make mistakes and you're going to fail, you're going to lose lots of elections, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. But one day it will dawn on you why you're there, because you were meant to be. So I'm now in a place that I feel like I was really meant to be. And if it wouldn't have been for Debbie and Ruth, who helped me get through those first couple of years, literally when I showed up and I didn't know anything about anything, and helped me to learn to speak and communicate and organize my thoughts, organize other people, really sort of sort out and make decisions about how you want to spend your time, I wouldn't be standing here before you tonight. But I'm very, very fortunate. I have a wonderful husband, 2 beautiful children. One's 19 with rashes all over his body. And my little girl talks to me every now and then. She's 14. So she, depending on the day, mothers, you will know this, she'll talk to me or not. But it's been great. She rolls her eyes a lot. But that's enough of my story. But thank you, and I'd love to take questions or comments. Thank you. I know it's warm, but we do have some time, so I'd love to take any questions or comments. I know I skipped through big chunks. Ariel?
Hi, my name is Ariel. Thank you for speaking. I really enjoyed listening to you. I know you said you work with the Department of Homeland Security, and that's just been, national defense.
Yes.
Action line. Can you just speak about your time working with that?
Yes, this is another sort of surprise. Thank you very much. This is a sort of a surprise to me because I was on the Homeland Security Committee, but I didn't realize that I would be the chair of the committee until Joe Biden got selected. Well, that's a different. I was thinking of small business, but anyway, it was a surprise to get to be Homeland Security chair. This is a very important position for New Jersey, which is why Frank Lautenberg is on the committee, because you all know and have read enough about the threats towards our country that New York and New Jersey are among the highest areas of risk. So I'm literally next week taking a border trip. I've never been to the border of Arizona, Mexico, California border. Of course, I've been to Arizona, I've been to California, but I've never toured the border. Why would I? I don't know. I've been over the border, but I'm now going to tour the border. I'm going into caves and helicopters and Black Hawk helicopters to go look, because now I'm in charge of the customs and border control. So I'm learning a lot about it. It's been an area that I'm really interested in now as the chairperson, but it's just like anything in a job. You get promoted or you get tasked to do something, and the first year or so you're on a pretty uphill curve learning about it. But our country is very fortunate. We've put a tremendous amount of resources in, literally reorganized the entire federal government, as you know, by creating the department, which was a task. And then we've resourced it. So my budget is $42 billion, which sounds like a lot, except the defense budget is $649 billion, just to give you the scale of Homeland Security is $42 billion, but defense is $649. So we fight for every dollar. And there's going to be a big fight now because the House passed a budget that, in my view, is what Representative King said. It's an invitation for attack. And so I'm going to be leading the fight to restore grants for local governments that they can participate and train their first responders, and so that we can be ready for what comes. You all do know, you've read enough. I've been in a half dozen classified briefings since Osama bin Laden was killed. But the huge amount of material that has come out of this stash is quite alarming, in the sense they're not telling you anything that's classified, but you've read the newspapers that there were documents found that clearly showed that they were still intent on attacking this country, and fairly specific, not not towns or cities or communities, but methods. Aviation is something they were still very interested in. So, I'm glad. And if you should want to come to Washington and work, intern for one of the committees or something like that, if you're interested in it, try to find an area where you could start working and work your way up. I'm very impressed with the women that briefed me on classified material. You wouldn't really realize how many women work like the CIA types. It's very interesting to me because I don't, it's not any field that I did, would be, but I'm briefed by some extraordinarily bright women that you'd see walking down the street. You'd think, they might be a school teacher or a nurse. No, they're a CIA operative, and I can't say hello to them on the street or how I know them because they're not supposed to be known. It's quite wonderful. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, some of us at dinner were talking about the University of Arizona is starting the Institute for Civil Discourse in Politics.
Because of Gabby.
Yes, that was the impetus for it, but I'm wondering, you're in the middle of so much of this. What do you see? Do you think that women have a special role and women political leaders have a special role in pushing this kind of initiative?
I would like to believe we do. I mean, we were talking at earlier as well. When I came up in the legislature, we would come to the center for, I came to the center when they invited all 300 women legislators, because that's all we had. I was one of 300 women legislators in the whole country. We have 7,000 approximate legislators, I think, in the country. Today, there were only 300 women when we first did our conference. And at the time, Democrats would come and we didn't even know who was a Democrat or Republican. That's how little we were focused on that. We were so focused on how do you get to be a committee chair and, how did you get to talk to your speaker about doing this, or how did you position yourself on what issues, But today, the whole country has gotten so partisan, and we've got to change it. And I think maybe having women be, starting that conversation would be very helpful. I think women may be, I'd like to say, less partisan. But then when you look at some of the polarizing figures that are female in the country today, very polarizing, you wonder, is it going to be women that solves this problem? Is it going to have to be all of us? But I'd encourage you to do whatever you can, because we've got to get to a better place where we're solving the issues and not just trying to make whoever the president is fail. Like, it's not right, I don't think, for Democrats when George Bush is the president to wish his presidency to fail, nor is it, I think, appropriate with President Obama for the Republicans to come to work every day wanting the president to fail. I mean, the election's the election. Let's get on with making the best of it. So, yes.
Hello, my name is Denise. Thank you very much for speaking. It's an honor to hear your story. My question was, you spoke about all the support you have throughout your life, whether it was your father, your mother, or your friend. What advice would you give to someone who doesn't have that support or that push?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very good question. I truly was very, very fortunate. Blanche Lincoln and I talk about this all the time because she came from a very supportive family as well. But if you read the book, 9 and Counting, about the women in the Senate, you'll see that Olympia Snowe was orphaned at a very young age. She had a very tough life. Married early, not early, but married in her 20s, and lost her husband. And so that book is her whole chapter, when I read it, and I serve, she's my co-chair. We're a ranking member, and I sit with her. We're together all the time. I sometimes go back and reread her chapter of that book to help me understand that we all come at this in very different ways. But what I would suggest, if anybody's in that situation, is you've got to find a support network somewhere, because I can tell you, you cannot do this alone. You can't do anything by yourself, anything well by yourself. So you've got to find family or friends. You can find the confidence from inside, but you've got to build a support network. In fact, I didn't tell you this, but one of my favorite stories is when I was 17, I was going to a leadership conference. I was, invited to go to this leadership conference and ended up getting on a bus to go to the conference, which was 4 hours away. We went in this bus. I don't know if it had air conditioning or not, but I remember my family telling me, that little Norma Jane Sabiston, her mother was the telephone operator at City Hall. that little Norma Jane Sabiston, she's gone on that You Should Look For Her. So I didn't know anyone, but I remembered them telling me. So I get on the bus, I sit next to this little blonde girl, my age. We have been friends ever since, and she never stopped talking for 4 hours. If you all think I can talk, I've never met anyone that could talk more than I could. So this was I didn't say a word. She talked for 4 hours. Then when I got to be the senator, she became my chief of staff, and she's been talking to me ever since. So you've got to find a friend like that, someone that believes in you, or a friend or two, and then y'all can do it together. They'll help you, you'll help them.
My name is Katie Fudes, and I want to thank you so much for speaking here today, and it was very inspirational. And currently I'm studying environmental science, policy, climate change, that kind of stuff.
Great.
And a current, a repetitive trend is the mindset in government of being reactive instead of proactive. And with climate change speeding up the process and the strength of environmental disasters, which then, when we recover, it's often the poor, the old, the sick who are left behind, due to a lack of resource. I'm very interested in doing policy reform in the future, I hope. So how would you, what is advice you would give to change that mindset and to start investing in some proactive solutions to...
Well, that's excellent. That's exactly what we're doing when we rebuild the city of New Orleans. I mean, we're trying to be very proactive. Great question about how to rebuild, but let me give you the challenge immediate that's before me, and if some of you think, well, I want to do what Mary does, I want to do what Senator Landrieu does, well, this is one of the things I wake up thinking about every day, and I'm figuring out how to do this. You all have heard of the Lower Ninth Ward. You've heard of the many neighborhoods. That was one of the ones that got much of the coverage, the Lower Ninth Ward. It's not any lower than any other part of the city. It's just called lower because it's below, south of a bayou, basically, an offshoot of the river. But it was predominantly African American, not as poor as people might think of it when they hear about it on the news, because Fats Domino was there, many of the great musicians from New Orleans. It was a small business, homeowners. Majority of the people that lived there might not have had a tremendous amount of assets, but they were homeowners, generationally owned a little home worth $75,000, $100,000. But in America today, it may surprise many of you, it surprised me when I found out about this, that the median wealth, not income, but median net worth of African American families in America today is $5,000. The median net worth of Hispanic families is $8,000. And the median net worth of white families is $113,000. So the disparity, which we read about, we sometimes experience in our own life, but from my perspective, I'm looking at literally 72 neighborhoods. Some of them are mixed, some of them are predominantly white, some of them have a strong Hispanic influence, and then this neighborhood is predominantly African American. And I look now 6 years, and I go through my city. I have 300 cities, so New Orleans is only one, but it's my hometown. I spent a lot of time there. I'm looking at this neighborhood, and I just had this conversation with Sean Donovan, Secretary of HUD, the other day, and several of the secretaries and the chief of staff to the president, Mr. Daley, and I said, what we're doing is not going to work for this neighborhood. And even though we've done a tremendous amount of good, this neighborhood just doesn't have enough wealth of itself to lift up without extra help. So I'm trying to think right now, because this is a big question. Harvard University is trying to figure this out. How does a country build a poor neighborhood, rebuild a poor neighborhood, or not poor in spirit, strong in spirit, but when it lacks assets? We can all build downtowns. We can all build wealthy neighborhoods. But if America can't figure this out, what country is? And I think it's our responsibility. So I've taken this special project on. That's just kind of one thing. So if some of you were interested in that, you could tell me, maybe come help work when we're going to bring nonprofits together and try to figure it out. And we have to come up with a model, because with climate change, we're going to have more tsunamis, more floods, and we owe people, whatever neighborhood you live in, the right to come home to a safe neighborhood and built again. But it's quite challenging. All right, one more. Yes.
Senator, it's an honor to hear you speak, and I just want to say I went to New Orleans earlier this year. It's such a beautiful city, and the people are the friendliest that I can find in this country. So
They
just
are.
wanted to say that. And I probably gained like 5 pounds.
That happens too. It's a dangerous place.
I'm actually a journalist, and I cover mostly education, so I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on rebuilding the education system in New Orleans.
Well, this will be my final and one of my favorites because this is what public policy is all about. I was chair on the Homeland Security Committee, of course, when the disaster hit. And the FEMA that showed up was so anemic, so disorganized. Did y'all hear the story of they bought ice in Massachusetts and put ice in 24 18-wheelers and drove the 18-wheelers? Did you hear this? This is a true story. And drove the 18-wheelers around the country for days. And the drivers of the truck in the ice came to testify before the committee one day, one of the hundreds of hearings I've had. And one of the drivers got so aggravated, having been told on the radio, okay, drive here, drive there. So he drove ice. The ice is melting. Okay, if you're a driver, you're driving ice, the ice is melting. He finally stopped at a gas station and basically dropped the nickel on the company. That's how we found out. And we spent like, I don't know, $200,000 on ice that never arrived. That's just one example of how, so I just made it my business to fix FEMA. I did 100 things to correct FEMA. The one I'll tell you about is my best. When a neighborhood or city is destroyed, like Joplin, Missouri, parts of Joplin in Louisiana, we had 147 schools. 100 were damaged. So FEMA's rules, before I changed them, were that they would reimburse us for each pencil that was lost, every piece of chalk, every desk. So everybody had to go back in and sort of count your pencils, your this, that, to get an estimate of what the federal government owed. And then the federal government, then you had to start rebuilding your school, and we would reimburse. Well, I'm thinking, we might not want to rebuild that school right there where it was. Plus, if it was old and decrepit, why would we want to spend the money renovating it? Since we lost so much, we're really building, like my brother says, we're not rebuilding the city we were. We're building the city we always dreamed we would be. And so I said, I'm not taking your checks. They said, well, that's the way you have to. I said, oh, no, I don't, because I'm a United States Senator. And so I'm not taking your checks. So I tried in every way to change I tried to write it in the bill, they'd take it out, but finally it took me 2 years. I finally got the bill passed so that it's created this arbitration panel and created a way for it to be a settlement. So about 6 months ago, the federal government handed the mayor and the elected officials in New Orleans a check for $1.8 billion. Didn't cost the taxpayer one more penny. It's not any more money than the taxpayers would have paid, but it's delivered in a way that enables us to take that money then and be smart about where we're building schools, how we're building schools. All of our schools are going to be LEED certified and all environmentally sensitive. And I mean, it's just going to be remarkable, not just the outside of the schools, but we have more kids now in public charter schools. 70% of our kids are in public charter schools. And some of the most exciting things are happening, like in one of our long-standing high schools, predominantly African-American high school, last week, they announced for the first time in the history of the school, even when it was all white, pre-Brown versus Board of Education, 100% of the kids graduated. 100%. That's what makes this work possible, and I'll end with this. Whether you decide to run for office or to just support someone you believe in, you can make a difference. You don't have to be in public office, but try to be, get yourself to a place where you can have some power, and seek it, and don't be afraid of it, and use it on behalf of people that don't have it. It will give you great joy in your life if you don't use it for yourself or to enrich yourself or your family, but use it for the kids that can't speak or won't speak, or women that get the heck beat out of them every day, or children that are victims of abuse. Use it for them, and you'll have a very happy life. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say that, Mary, you were worth waiting for. And I just want to say that when I watch you here and hear the story, and I've known you for 30 years, and yeah, we both were teenagers, I think. But much of your story, I didn't know all the little pieces. And it was just wonderful. I have to say that one of the best experiences I had is thanks to you. I went down to New Orleans for your first Women Leaders Summit, and you gave me the privilege of introducing a mutual friend of ours, Donna Brazil. And Donna took me on a tour of the Lower Ninth, and it was really incredibly moving. And I have to say that I think all of us here at the center who knew you when were so proud to watch you post-Katrina and what you were doing and the contribution you made then and the contribution you continue to make. So thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for being here with us tonight.